Good day, everyone. On behalf of Director Denise O'Donnell at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, let me welcome you to this webinar on communication strategies for body-worn camera programs. My name is Chip Coldren. I'm the Managing Director for Justice Programs at the CNA Institute for Public Research, the Director of Technical Assistance for the Bureau's Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance Program, and I will provide the introduction for today's webinar. This is another in a series of webinars sponsored by the Bureau and coordinated by CNA for the Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance Program. We thank the Bureau of Justice Assistance for its investment in the Body-Worn Camera Grant Program, in the Body-Worn Camera Toolkit, and in a range of technical assistance resources and opportunities for agencies implementing body-worn cameras. The Bureau supports state, county, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies in many, many ways, and we are grateful that they do. This webinar will discuss how agencies can best manage and respond to the media and community after a crisis or high-profile event that involves deliberate or inadvertent release of video footage. Without pre-thought and pre-planning regarding how to manage the release of video footage, a police agency can experience erosion of public community relations and perhaps violence. The presenters will share their communication strategies and experiences in responding to police critical incidents, as well as recommendations regarding how best to plan for and respond to incidents involving video footage. Let me introduce our panelists for today's webinar. As a technical advisor for the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Justice Programs, Laura McElroy shares best practices in building collaborative partnerships and trust through community engagement, media, and social media strategies. She spent 11 years as the Director of Communications for the Tampa Police Department and 16 years as an award-winning reporter and anchor. Laura Meltzer is a 14-year veteran officer of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. She served in the Patrol Division and as a community policing officer for 8 years. She spent the last 6 years as the face and voice of the department as a public information officer. She is also a department instructor who teaches media for law enforcement classes to members of her department, as well as academies for other agencies in Southern Nevada. Christopher Cook is an award-winning speaker and subject matter expert in the field of social media for law enforcement and media relations for public safety. As a lieutenant for the Arlington, Texas Police Department, he oversees the Public Information Office and has led the Arlington Police Department's public and media relations strategy since 2011. He is the current General Chair for the International Association of Chiefs of Police Public Information Officer Section. Damon Mosler began his career with the County District Attorney's Office in 1992 and has held positions such as Chief of the Major Crimes Division, Chief of the Special Operations Division, and the Law Enforcement Liaison. Now he serves as the Chief of the Economic Crimes Division and also as a subject matter expert for CNA on body-worn camera issues in prosecutors' offices. We thank these presenters for working with us to put this webinar together and for their participation today. Please permit me to make a few other comments. This webinar is recorded for the benefit of others who may view it later on our website, so please be mindful of that. There will be opportunities for questions and participation during the webinar, so please make your thoughts and questions known. I can assure you that others will appreciate hearing what you have to say. If you don't get a chance to voice your comments or questions, please use the chat utility to the right of your screen and we'll do our best to respond to your input. Following the webinar, you will receive a request to evaluate it. Please complete the evaluation and please give us your honest thoughts and recommendations. And please let us know what other topics you think we should cover on future webinars. Let me also thank Denise Rodriguez and Dominique Burton at CNA, who do the background work to make sure these webinars go smoothly. I'll now take us through a brief introduction to the session and then turn it over to Laura McElroy. So first we're going to hear from Laura McElroy and her thoughts about community relationships related to the release of body-worn camera videos. Then, as I said, we'll hear from two police departments, from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and the Arlington, Texas Police Department, both of whom have interesting incidents and outcomes to share regarding the release of body-worn camera video. Then we'll hear some thoughts from Damon Mosler from San Diego about what he calls avoiding the false narrative. Then we'll end up with some closing remarks, and we have a brief slide at the end that directs you to other resources regarding body-worn cameras. So thanks for your attention. Thanks, everybody, for participating today, and let's turn it over to Laurel McElroy to start us off.
Thanks so much, Chip. You really don't have to leave the comfort of your living room in order to hear about the debate with body-worn cameras. It has dominated the news this summer and fall. So I want to start by reviewing the most recent cases and look at how they could impact the future of body-worn camera policies and ultimately the relationship between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. The attitudes toward officer-involved shootings or really any high-profile police incident have changed in our post-Ferguson world, and body-worn cameras have certainly played a role in those evolving attitudes. Today, when an officer uses deadly force, how the community reacts is less based on the facts of the shooting and more based on how the agency handles those facts. And we have seen this played out time and time again all over our country. So I want to raise the question, doesn't it make sense that our policies have to evolve along with these changes? People used to ask, was the person armed? Now the questions have changed. They're asking, is your agency trustworthy? Are you open? Are you going to release the video? Will the investigation be fair? They want to know if the officers will be held accountable if it's appropriate. The focus has shifted away from the actions of the subject and has really focused now on the actions of the agency. Once officers began wearing body-worn cameras, it created an expectation in the media and in the public that they would be able to view the video and that they feel they should be able to view it. And the Police Executive Research Forum tells us that this is a reasonable expectation. In PERF's body-worn camera recommendations, we see a shift toward a more open mindset. So if your agency adopts body-worn cameras, then it may be in your agency's best interest that you adopt the position that the video those cameras record is ultimately public record. Let's start with Tulsa. The facts. On September 16th, an officer shot and killed a motorist by the name of Terrence Critcher. We later learned from the police chief that Critcher was unarmed. On Monday, the police chief announced that he would release the video of the body-worn camera. That's also when the first protest took place. It erupted with about 24 people taking part in it. The chief first showed the video to the family and to African-American leaders and also to elected officials on Monday. And then he released it. He showed it to the family over the weekend, and on Monday he released it to the media and to the public. 3 days later, the officer involved in the shooting was charged with manslaughter. The prosecutor said that the officer became emotionally involved to the point that she overreacted. It's important to note that the protests in Tulsa remain peaceful. And at times, as you can see from this photograph, very unremarkable. This is a live shot where the station seems to be willing the protest to reconvene. Thankfully, they were unsuccessful. But if we review the takeaways from the Tulsa incident, they released the video quickly, which reduced the tension and the anger in the community. And that action spoke louder than anything the chief could say at a news conference. It showed the community that the police had nothing to hide, and it established trust that the investigation would be open and that it would be fair. And it may be the release of the video that kept the protest local. Demonstrators who are willing to travel to a location to further their cause are going to pick a city where there's growing tension, where the police department is taking a position that is sparking more controversy. By putting all the facts in the video out quickly, it de-escalated the situation and really allowed the chief to manage the story rather than the story managing him. And I also want to note that it worked very well that the chief had a member of the African-American community, a pastor, at his news conference. It highlighted their community partnerships, and the pastor was urging people to stay calm and wait for the video. Okay, moving on to Charlotte, the facts. September 20th, an officer shot and killed Keith Lamont Scott, and the protest started the very same day. The chief held a news conference the next morning and announced that Scott was armed. However, the story that Scott was holding a book goes viral on social media, and the demonstrations intensify. 2 days later, the police decide to show the video to the family, and another 2 days pass before the video is released publicly. However, by the time that took place, we all know that the demonstrators were looting businesses. We watched it on national television. They blocked major intersections. They literally held the downtown area hostage for multiple nights, and a 26-year-old protester was killed in the melee. Initially, Charlotte followed a protocol that had been the gold standard in law enforcement. You don't release evidence until the investigation is complete. But it certainly appears a new standard is evolving, one that pushes law enforcement to act quickly to maintain public trust in the wake of a controversial incident such as an officer-involved shooting. So if we take a look at the takeaways with Charlotte, unfortunately, the city lost control of the messaging when the story shifted away from the facts of the incident and became almost entirely focused on whether the video should be released. And even though the city held the traditional briefings once a day, it simply couldn't compete with the constant flow of misinformation that was on the social media. So what if the video was released before people started crying police cover-up? I would venture to guess that the agency would have established some trust into their investigation, and they may have bought themselves time to get to the bottom of what happened. But when they did release the video, at that point, they were already in a no-win situation. And I think Chuck Ramsey said it best in his New York Times column that came out a couple weeks ago, that in this day and age, hesitation erodes trust. So what do you do when the police shooting is in your city? There's a window of time to get into the driver's seat on the messaging. And when a violent and controversial incident happens in your community, people are afraid. And I learned this lesson covering the president on 9/11 in Sarasota. And when the president came out and said, we are under attack and you're either with us or against us, at that moment, I was not a reporter. I was just a person, and I was afraid. And in that moment, people are looking for a leader. They're looking for a voice of calm that can instill confidence. And while a police shooting is on a much smaller scale, when it happens in your city, people worry. Is it going to lead to more violence? Will protesters wreak havoc on our town? Will more people end up hurt? That is the moment for a leader to emerge, but it has to be done quickly, and that's where Twitter comes into play. You really can't wait until you have all the facts to hold the traditional news conference. You have to, as soon as you have a verified nugget of information, you have to tweet it out and establish your agency's voice as the authority. And there's always time for the traditional news conference after your initial tweets. Of course, this goes against the grain for law enforcement, but we watched the FBI do it with the recent New York bombings, and we saw Boston do it after their bombing. And they really established a new standard for law enforcement. As soon as they had confirmed information, they tweeted it out. And when the media or someone with a large following on Twitter sent out misinformation, they immediately corrected it. And Boston PD established themselves as the official source of information, and they really instilled confidence in the community and the nation. And that's what's needed when an officer-involved shooting happens in your community. So now what if someone releases cell phone video before you even have a handle on the facts? Well, this is where acting quickly takes on a whole new meaning. You have to establish your voice as a legitimate source of information as soon as possible. Otherwise, you risk losing control over the messaging. And one way that you can accomplish this is when you send a PIO to the scene, you assign a second PIO or a commander to monitor all the social media. You want to know what's being said about your agency as soon as possible, and you don't want to get that dreaded phone call from a reporter asking about the post on social media that puts you in a very defensive position. And you can practice this dual PIO approach with a smaller incident before you have a high-profile event like an officer-involved shooting. And then you get to work tweeting and posting the facts as quickly as you can, and just as importantly, you tell the community how you will handle your investigation. What is your protocol? What's your process? So that they can know your agency is trustworthy, it's open, and it's accountable. And of course, every single case has to be considered individually based on its facts, but if there is body-worn camera video, it may be in your best interest to release it, and if it shows a violation of some sort, then you have to be prepared to deal with it swiftly, because otherwise it could fuel unrest in your community. Of course, the best way to build trust in your agency is to do it before you have a crisis. And a few years back when I was working at the Tampa Police Department, we lost 2 officers in one night, which resulted in a 4-day manhunt. And during that time, we had 400 tips that came in, and every single one of them we responded to with a SWAT presence, yet we didn't have pushback from the community. And so when CNA and the COPS office came to town, thank you very much, to handle our after-action report, they kept asking, why didn't you have the public backlash? And to tell you the truth, I didn't have a good answer, because most of the work was done long before this incident. And we did it every day with our community policing. And I share this story with you because every time one of your officers interacts with the public, they have the opportunity to build that relationship and build the trust that you desperately need when crisis strikes. Now, the laws regulating body-worn cameras are changing around the country almost daily, and so I want to direct you to the Urban Institute's website. It breaks down the laws into the most critical and hotly debated categories. It's a great way to track the trends. It's a terrific resource. And another great resource for learning about the body-worn camera policies is the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University. It gives you a summary of each city's policy, and again, it's based on the most critical categories. And I've highlighted a policy by the Minneapolis Police Department. It starts with the old gold standard that any video that's part of an investigation is exempt, but it has a critical clause in there that gives the chief the discretion needed to release video when a crisis strikes. Because I think we have all seen, just watching the news, that when it comes to police shootings today, the focus is not on the facts, but on how your agency handles those facts. And now I'll turn it over to Laura Meltzer in Las Vegas.
Hold on a second. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Laura. Can everyone hear me? I think we've had some technical issues.
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you for inviting us to tell our story today, because the story of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department communicating with our public after a use of force incident is really a tale of 2 cities. It's a before and after picture. Prior to having the body-worn cameras to assist us in telling the story about an OIS or another critical incident, the LVMPD was met with hostility, contention, distrust, and suspicion. And those body-worn camera clips have literally allowed us to change the optics on the story. Through the lenses of the body-worn cameras, we've been able to take an out-of-focus picture and make it very clear. We've, in essence, removed the guessing. So in an age when everyone has the ability to record an incident, when possible, we have found that the release of body-worn camera footage or other surveillance footage to be a way of allowing the public to actually experience a critical incident from the officer's point of view. It holds more impact, it's more transparent when the public can see and hear the action rather than only hearing about it from a speaker at a press conference. So the before view of what it was like then, this was prior to 2011, and a press briefing after a deadly use of force incident usually began with a very brief statement by the sheriff or undersheriff that gave very little detail. The specific details were only released after the coroner's inquest, which usually didn't occur for months after the incident. This atmosphere in the room was very contentious, and because there was very little detail, there was an attitude that the police department was hiding something. This then led to a 5-part expose in November of 2011 in a local newspaper called Deadly Force: When Las Vegas Police Shoot and Kill. So the years of frustration with the process culminated in this 5-part expose. But prior to the publishing of the articles, the LVMPD had actually reached out to the Department of Justice COPS office and had begun conversations about participating in the collaborative reform process. One of the findings of that review was that the information that the department was providing to the public regarding the circumstances of an officer-involved shooting was not meeting community expectations and was contributing to the public's negative perception of the department. So the use of body-worn cameras by officers was also a recommendation, which led to the necessity for the policy, not only for the officers' use of the camera, but also for the release to the public and the media. So as a result of that collaborative reform process, the policy for the release of information after an officer-involved shooting or other critical incident was significantly changed. Here's also where the role of body-worn camera footage or other surveillance footage can significantly impact our story and the resulting media coverage. So upon receiving notification of an officer-involved shooting or other critical incident, the PIO sergeant and the on-call PIO will respond to the scene. Once an initial briefing is conducted by the investigators and the basic story is known, a video is then recorded with the captain of the Office of Internal Oversight and Constitutional Policing utilizing a cell phone. This video is then uploaded to the department's YouTube channel and made public. The captain then gives a briefing to any media that are on scene. A written press release is generally sent to local media within a few hours. After 48 hours and after notification to the officer or officers involved, the names, ages, length of employment, current assignment, those are all sent to the media with the officer's status. Sometime after 72 hours, executive staff is briefed by investigators and a press briefing is scheduled as soon as possible after. During the press briefing, a fact sheet is also handed out to media representatives about the investigative process. This is also posted to our website. Press briefings are then conducted by the undersheriff where more detailed information is released, as well as any body-worn camera footage or surveillance footage that will not jeopardize any criminal investigation. The determination is made only after consultation with executive staff, investigators, and the district attorney's office. It should be noted that family members of the subjects that are involved are notified and view the footage prior to public release. The briefing is also recorded by the LVMPD video unit, and a link to the video of the full press conference is put into a detailed press release and sent to media as well as posted to our website after the briefing. So now I have some examples to share with you about the release of body-worn camera footage and surveillance footage that has changed some of our story. And of course our disclaimer that the next slide contains graphic footage and language. Just a warning ahead of time. Okay, this is telling me I can't play the video. Is there anyone on the other end who can play that?
Greg. No. Greg.
Okay, I think we're having some technical difficulties with the video. So this first video clip that is being shown is actually a suicidal subject that officers were attempting to negotiate with the subject, and the man started firing an assault rifle. We also had a second clip, and I don't know whether or not we'll be able to get that played for you, but we also had a second clip from officers that were in a breezeway underneath the apartment where the suspect was, and then you can hear the resulting rifle fire as those officers are attempting to evacuate people from the area. At the playing of this video during the press briefing, there was a collective jump, gasp, covering of the mouths as the extremely loud gunshots ring out. And if we can get that to play, I think you can agree that the video tells the story in a way no speaker could. Doesn't look like we'll be able to play that. The second video that we have in here is actually the result of a routine traffic stop conducted for an inoperable taillight. We had an agitated driver that after unsuccessful attempts by the officer to de-escalate the situation, the driver then retrieved a handgun. and there was a resulting officer-involved shooting. And the suspect was killed, but in addition to that, one of our officers who arrived to assist was grazed in the neck. Again, this footage was a way to give a virtual ride-along to media showing how quickly a routine traffic stop went very badly. The third example that we had was a December 7th, 2014 incident. This was not actually body-worn camera footage, but surveillance video from a local hotel and casino. Undercover detectives that attempted to take a suspect wanted in connection with several armed robberies into custody. The suspect was in a public area, and the resulting officer-involved shooting resulted in the suspect's death. Local media interviewed a witness who indicated the suspect was executed by police and the cops had shot him in the back of the head. The reporter was asked to wait for additional details after the 72-hour briefing as per protocol, but the reporter ran with the story anyway, indicating the suspect was executed. The following day at the press conference, the surveillance video was played which showed the suspect pulling a gun out of a bag and attempting to shoot the detective who was behind the suspect. The suspect actually shoots himself in the chest before being shot by the detective, and the reporter then retracted his story in the next newscast. So the last clip that we have on here was body-worn camera footage that was instrumental in diffusing a potentially inflammatory police shooting that occurred on December 31st of 2015. A suspect facing a lengthy prison sentence in Arizona fled to Las Vegas. U.S. Marshals were attempting to take him into custody when he ran. That suspect was then confronted by an LVMPD sergeant, and in the span of 2 minutes and 13 seconds, the sergeant gave numerous commands for the suspect to drop the gun, get on the ground, let me see your hands, and if you advance towards us, you will be shot. The suspect continued to approach officers with his right hand clutching an unknown object that officers believed to be a gun. The suspect was shot and killed, and the item in his hand was later found to be a cell phone. And the body-worn camera footage up to where the suspect was shot was released at the press briefing showing the sequence of events, and this essentially diffused this potentially inflammatory police shooting. So that takes us to where we are now, and the release of this video footage is so the body-worn camera footage as well as surveillance footage, when it can be released, has changed the atmosphere at a press conference. Many times we get reporters that don't even attend these press briefings, only photographers, and the climate is not nearly as contentious. It is also very important to note that the public has access to these full press briefings via the LVMPD website. They don't have to rely on the media for a brief soundbite. They can watch the briefing in its entirety. So in closing, the public has asked for police departments to be more accountable and more transparent, hence the body-worn cameras. And so the point is to give the public what it wants. If the department has footage from a controversial incident and the public is asking to see what the officer's body-worn camera captured, put it out. The fear shouldn't be in what will happen if you release the footage. The fear should be in what will happen if you don't. And thanks very much.
Good afternoon. This is Chris from Arlington, Texas. Mine's going to be just a little different take on this perspective. We don't actually, at the time of this incident we're going to discuss, we were in a body-worn camera pilot project, but I think there's a lot of value on what I'm going to brief everyone on as far as the release of information and just the day and age that we're kind of involved in nowadays. A lot of times I think it's important that we kind of get back to how did we get to this point. You know, we've been engaging in this national dialogue for a few years now. A lot of people call it the post-Ferguson environment. And in reality, I think what we're seeing is that the public is just demanding more transparency. They're demanding more information, especially early on when an incident occurs, whether that's a officer misconduct case, whether that is a use of force incident that we typically see covered by the national media. And so this is kind of what has brought police executives to the table to figure out that, okay, what we've done in the past, which is typically protect an investigation or under the auspices of trying to protect an investigation and the integrity of not releasing too many facts to where a case is potentially tried in the media or in the public, a court of public opinion, we've found out that a lot of times in these cases that we've seen around the country, as the previous speakers have alluded to, it is much more difficult to operate under that type of thinking and that type of framework. And so what we argue from the IECP perspective is that it's better to really get out in front of some of these events when you can. Obviously, case integrity is very important. We get a lot of questions on that when we're teaching this around the country to other PIOs and other chiefs and sheriffs. We understand that case integrity is vital, but at the same time, we also understand that community integrity is that important as well, because if you sit on things for a long period of time, then it allows for other speculation and other commentary and these false narratives to really take hold. And so without really being redundant on what was already said, I'm going to move on to kind of how we got here. There's been this perception for some time of racial inequities and injustices that have been suffered at the hands of police. And whether you look at the data or whether you're just engaging in those types of conversation pieces, we have to at least acknowledge as a law enforcement profession that this type of conversation is going on around our country and in our communities. And so that's why we think that relationships are so important before you actually even have an incident. Having these relationships in place to where you can really navigate through an incident when your community is in the forefront of whatever's going on. And sometimes if we relate this back to body-worn camera discussion that we're talking about, a lot of times when you have this video footage and it's available, and once you get your pieces in place, sometimes that is able, as other speakers have already said, that's able to kind of squash some of this false narrative and assist with having the community kind of restore order and get back to a place where they trust those that are in charge, or they trust the legitimacy of the government, i.e. the police, to handle this incident. You've also seen this movement to record police. I mean, this is really, the proliferation of smartphones has been incredible, not to mention social media. We didn't really have to deal with this back in the day before smartphones were out there. Now you have a situation, anytime there's force being used in the field, I don't care how big or small your community is, people have their phones out and they're looking to be that next hit on YouTube, and we see that time and time again. And so there's just more accountability really out there in the field demanded from the public. And then you have the mainstream media, and unfortunately, you know, sometimes they get it right, a lot of times they don't, for a variety of reasons. And so we will also say that relationships with your media are vitally important as well, because equally they have a stake in this game as well. And so when our media partners show up on these scenes, when we're dealing with critical incidents such as maybe a major use of force incident where there's been a police shooting or something to that effect that typically fans up our communities, we have to be able to trust those that are reporting the news as well. And I think relationships are important, because if I have a relationship with my local media, I'm able to really buy me some time and explain why maybe we're not releasing a video within the first few hours of an incident. However, we're working quickly to resolution on trying to figure out what we're able to provide them. Moving to the next slide, here's what a typical pattern, just looking at of incidents across the country. Typically on a demand from the community, whether that's a social service organization or a community outreach organization, the public will typically say, okay, why are you not releasing the video? What are you trying to hide? So there's an immense external pressure coming from a variety of sources, including a lot of times the family of the parties that are involved, the public itself, your local social service organizations, the media. There will be enormous pressure placed on the organization to push out information. Also, you got to also realize that you have to be consistent with your normal practices. And what I mean by that is, if you typically release a video when an officer is saving a life, for example, and then all of a sudden you have a use of force incident, and all of a sudden we're not releasing the video because we claim it's under investigation or we have to work with the district attorney's office, if that's not consistent with our normal practice, there's going to be challenges issued to the police organization. That's going to really undermine the legitimacy of not only the public information officer, but the chief executive and also the entire organization in city or county. You also got a lot of internal pressures on releasing a video. A majority of the time, employee groups are going to say no. They don't want that going on because they don't want that case tried in the court of public opinion. A lot of times your investigators, and I know our PIOs on this line will agree with me, a lot of times criminal investigators, they don't want to release anything. Why? Because they're trying to protect the case integrity of what's going on. And so at the end of the day, you're dealing with all these pressures. You got your local district attorney's offices a lot of times. You know, they have a piece in this argument as well. And so then sometimes you're dealing with your elected officials, and they'll weigh in. And so you got all these external and internal pressures. Then you've got open records laws, and then you've got at the end of the day the sanctity of life and morals of decency, which I claim a lot of times these videos they're not pretty, they're not easy to watch. And so even though you have these demands to release the video, you as a PIO and as a police chief or a sheriff, you're dealing with all this. You're having to wrestle with all this. And so I just throw that out there to know that it's not as easy as just saying, okay, we have an incident, we're automatically releasing every single time. It's really going to be contingent and dependent upon a lot of these variables as your organization navigates an incident like this. So that's something to keep in mind as we're talking about this body-worn camera phenomenon, really, because we know that agencies are moving to this. We know there's going to be more videos out there. Importance on proper sequencing and timing of release. We've already talked about the case integrity, but you also got to make sure your notifications are in place. We have to know, obviously the employees that are involved need to know that, hey, we're getting ready to release this, and this is the reason why. Typically in Arlington, what we do when we have video footage, whether it's from body-worn camera or from another source, we'll meet with the families that are involved. We'll allow them and afford them an opportunity to see it first, and that typically works well for us because it kind of shows we get a little bit of buy-in from the family that we're trying to work with them, and it also prepares them for what they're going to see that's going to play out in the national media a lot of times. As a media office, your PIO team needs to be ready because as soon as it goes out, there's going to be a lot of phones ringing, a lot of emails coming in, a lot of social media monitoring that's going to need to occur because people will make what they want to make of the video. We know that on social media, people can say whatever they want to do. They don't have to operate in the land of facts, which we have to operate in. And so it's really important that you're monitoring those traditional news organizations and social media so that you're able to try to correct inaccuracies when they develop. You'll never be able to control the narrative, and that's what you're going to see in our case here in just a second. But a lot of times you're able to guide the conversation. And then typically in Arlington, what we do, we don't really offer redacted portions. We like to offer the full version if possible. Granted, we work with the district attorney's office. We work with those entities involved. But a lot of times when you release a heavily redacted video, I don't care if it's body-worn camera or a surveillance footage, there's going to be that offers the community time to speculate on what you've redacted out. And if you've already is suffering from an erosion of trust in the community, that can be problematic as well. So here's real quickly, in about 2 minutes or less, we had a shooting last summer. There was an immediate public outcry for information. The appetite for information is enormous in the first few hours of an incident. Quickly, they wanted to know the race of the victim, the race of the officer. And what the shooting involved was a dealership. One of our officers responded to a burglary in progress. There was a confrontation between the suspects and some of our officers, which resulted in the loss of life of the suspect at the dealership. Again, we did not have body-worn cameras at the time, but there was some surveillance footage at the dealership that didn't actually capture the shooting, but captured the suspect's behavior, captured some of the officer's movement. Before that was released, social media moves at the speed of light, and so there was this false narrative that was occurring where people on social media that had enormous reach, meaning they had lots of followers, and so when they said something on social media, people paid attention. They had a lot more followers than the Arlington Police Department's ever going to have. We're talking millions of followers, some of these people. And so when they spoke, people really listened and paid attention. You see, it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but Serena Williams, a famous tennis player, when she puts up a tweet about our shooting, that's going to get a lot of play in the media. And regardless of whether she's speaking from a facts-based approach or whether she's just speculating and adding fuel to the fire, it really doesn't matter. It causes a lot of harm to the organization. And so what we had to do is really monitor that, and we determined very quickly that we're going to need to release this video from the surveillance company because it's going to assist us in correcting some of this false narrative. The example I'll give you, they claim that the suspect, he drove his vehicle to the showroom glass door. The false narrative that was taking hold was that we shot him in his car, and that's what caused him to drive to the showroom floor. Well, that was completely inaccurate, not a bit of facts at all, but we weren't able to really correct that until we're able to post the video. We also recommend, obviously, you do scripted press conferences and stuff like that to accompany your video release because they're going to analyze for hours any kind of video that's been released. You're going to have these so-called experts. A lot of them claim to be prior law enforcement backgrounds or stuff like that. They're going to really analyze and pick apart your video, and so it's important that whoever's doing this press conference, which typically is going to be your chief executive officer, that they're scripted and they know exactly what is contained in the video and that they're able to avoid some of the traps that you sometimes see play out in the national media. And so here's just some examples of, because we acted very quickly. I would say within 2 days we had the video out there. We started correcting this false narrative that was taking hold. We received some really good national coverage about how quickly and transparent we were in releasing not only the video, we released the radio traffic. And again, guys, 5 or 10 years ago, if we had an officer-involved shooting, we would not release any of this. It's just that we live in a different time now, and you just can't sit on this information any longer because it allows too much room for speculation and for false narratives to take hold. Again, you see the Arlington shooting shows how Twitter is a game changer. Social media stuff can just fire up very quickly, and you've really got to be on your A game. You've really got to have a one-stop shop. So everything that we released related to the shooting, we put on a dedicated web page, and we linked back through our Twitter, through our Facebook, through our YouTube. Any social media platform we tried to leverage and direct everybody, whether you're the national media or you're a local John Q. citizen living in Arlington, Texas that want to know what is going on, we direct you to one-stop shop so you can see all of that information. You can see there one of the feedback also from George Faulkner there. The department's doing everything right in the officer-involved shooting, transparent, timely, and seeking an independent review. And so we try to capitalize on some of that. And then I want to kind of end real quickly on my slides where we catalog the story where not only once you release a video, you're not done. There's still a story that's going to be told about your organization, and so it's important for your team to be able to capture these moments. This is an example of our police chief and the mayor there with the family of the decedent at a prayer rally. You want to be able to be there and capture this kind of information so that you can show that what you've done has really assisted. And so let me end real quickly just showing that it's really an all hands on deck when it comes to managing the message. And when you've got video footage out there, it's much better to go through it, get out in front of it, and push your information. And for the sake of time, I'll move to the next speaker.
Thank you, Chris. It's interesting listening to all of the speakers today, and I can certainly say that it's been a part of our journey here in San Diego County. I know that the thoughts and policies of many agencies related to body-worn camera video release have definitely shifted over the past 2 years, and that's highlighted by what we've heard today. The widespread deployment of body-worn cameras have brought new expectations and many unanticipated consequences. Here in San Diego, it was clear to me and my office that no video should be released. At least that was our view at first. We wanted to preserve, as Chris had highlighted, any evidence for a prosecution, and we felt that to release the videos would create a slippery slope, with the outcome being that all videos in all cases get released, irrespective of the harm to those on the tapes or the cases therein. I am hoping that the current plan to release officer-involved shooting videos does not end up creating an expectation that all videos should be released, as I believe there would be many adverse consequences if it would end up that way. Thanks to the foresight of my District Attorney, Bonnie DeMonis, our Sheriff, Bill Gore, and San Diego Police Department Chief Shelley Zimmerman, along with the Chiefs of Police in San Diego, we worked on creating a policy that gives the public the opportunity to see the videos on a shooting, but in a way that we hope preserves the integrity of our investigation and is in accordance with human decency. To get there, we started with a working group within the law enforcement community. Several agencies, Their lawyers, the U.S. Attorney, the FBI, and city attorneys were consulted and helped draft a policy. And I'm trying to move to the next slide, and it's not working for me. We already had a long-standing working agreement on how our county handles officer-involved shootings. The body-worn camera video release would be another aspect to be added to it. Upon completion of the draft law enforcement policy that had been vetted, we then consulted with police officer associations and held public forums for the input from the public, the media, and the ACLU. From these forums, we made some changes, but it also became clear that the various interests could not be completely reconciled. Our plan, and I definitely believe that in all likelihood it is a work in progress, is that the investigation will be completed by the shooting agency within 3 months, and then within 3 months the district attorney's office will complete its review of the investigation and the shooting. In the past it had taken much longer than this, but the emphasis now will be adding resources to make these things happen in a much shorter period of time. Upon completion of the review, we would hold a district attorney hosted press conference to announce our determination and to release relevant videos and to show them at the press conference. We would redact the videos by tiling over the faces of the officers and any other witnesses and the person who had been shot, and would stop the video at the point that shots were fired. We felt that the point the shots were fired would end the issue in terms of evaluating whether something was justified or not, and there was no reason to show an actual person being shot or falling to the ground. The press conference would help the public and the media understand the evaluation process and put the video in context, and also importantly, limit the commercial value of the videos to others in the stream of commerce. As I said before, there were many different groups and interests that have weighed in and have a right to weigh in on how and when the videos would be released. And I'm having trouble changing this slide as well. The media, generally we have found, wants all of the videos they can get their hands on, as it makes their job easy to play such videos, and they really do not have to evaluate any other concerns. Almost nothing short of full, immediate, unredacted release would satisfy them. On the other hand, the ACLU has internal competing interests that we have learned about. One, certainly holding the police accountable, but also many concerns for the privacy of anyone else caught on the video, including the person who may have been shot. Having spoken to many of the people with the ACLU, I have learned that they have division within their own ranks, and sometimes their views change from region to region or event to event. But I do believe that they are leaning towards releasing less videos over a period of time in a more responsible fashion. In meeting with the police officers and their unions, their biggest concern was officer safety, that even when a very justified shooting took place, that to release someone's name and picture could cause them great harm because sometimes the videos do not show the exact nature of what took place. It could cause reprisals for themselves or their families at home. And from the prosecution perspective, we need to preserve the case itself, and that is something we were very concerned about and certainly been spoken about. There are ethical limitations as to what can be made public before a court hearing, as well as the impact to the jury pool and overall trial integrity. Both victims and witnesses have concerns about their own privacy. Sometimes the videos caught, and not just in officer-involved shooting videos, but other videos, may depict them not at their personal best, and if they knew they were to be released, may impede them in either reporting the crime, participating in the prosecution, or helping out at the particular scene. The last two areas deal with some permanent consequences. One is the human decency of showing somebody dying or potentially dying, and the other one is if the videos are to be released and perhaps the person who is subject to the police investigation is not at their finest moment either, do they deserve permanent video record of them misbehaving at that point in time? In looking at the release issues, although immediate release is the latest public clamor, we cannot mindlessly go along with that without addressing how that can and will impact the investigation into the shooting. Releasing a video before all witnesses are interviewed will possibly taint their impressions and their recollection of their observations of the event. This is true for both officers and recipient witnesses. The videos, as we have seen, can impact criminal prosecutions, and for many of the same reasons, it can impact civil cases to the detriment of either the plaintiff or the defendant. As we evaluate the release in accordance to our protocol, we also look at which ones to release, trying to act responsibly and not show the actual impact of the bullet, but to find the right angle that shows what the officer was doing and why the officer was doing it, and then the fact that they fired. So we are cautious in selecting the angles that we use for the release of the videos. And the reality is, the general public expectation is that a body-worn camera will capture every aspect of a shooting, so we can all see and agree on what happened to lead up to and cause the shooting, justified or not justified. But these expectations, as we all know, are too high. So many variables impact whether true evidence will be caught on the tape. These variables need to be explained at times to temper the expectations so that when video can be released, it is understood despite any deficiencies. Our policy, and almost any policy reasonably formatted, will not satisfy all of the competing interests, as we can see by the various interests and positions outlined. My advice is to keep listening and evaluating as you work on your policy and consider modifying it as time permits. The issues and their solutions will evolve from agency to agency over time. At this point, I think we have time for questions.
Thank you, Damon. Yes, we do have some time. So would anybody like to ask a question or enter a question into the chat room at this point for any of our panelists? So I think I'd like to ask a brief question. What do you do when there's conflict between the prosecutor and the chief about the release of video footage, and how frequent does that happen? Can I start with you, Laura, in your experience? McElroy?
Well, we did have that come up more than once, not always body-worn camera, but just wanting to release dash cam video or release video that captured some evidence in a case. And I called it the negotiation process. You know, we would lay out everything that we wanted to release and give a justification of why we wanted to release it. And then they would say, well, what if you released a much smaller version of that? And then we would come back with another suggestion on our part. Okay, well, what if we worded it this way? And what if we only used this portion of the video? We just negotiated back and forth to make sure that the state attorney was comfortable, but we could still be responsive and open to our community. And so just working together, we just muddled through and figured out what would satisfy the needs of both parties, and it was different each time.
Okay, thank you. How about you, Laura Meltzer?
We actually haven't had a situation where there's been back and forth between the DA and investigators, but internally we did have some discussion that went on about the release of body-worn camera footage that it actually resulted in our officer being fired as well as facing federal charges. So that video was never released, and that's due to the ongoing criminal investigation. But it was interesting seeing some of the discussions that went on internally just from the different points of view of the officers that had a stake in the discussion about whether or not that should be released. We actually had a lot of local media requesting that coverage, and ultimately that request was denied. But it was an interesting conversation.
Thank you. And Chris?
Yeah, we have had a few cases where, first of all, we have a brand new district attorney in Tarrant County after like 30 years. So there's been a changing of the guard. And we have a great relationship with the district attorney, but obviously when you have a new person at the helm, there's different policies. And so what we try to typically do is just, I guess massage that relationship the best we can. And a lot of times we'll work from a PIO peer-to-peer level with her office saying, this is what we're planning to do. If you have any heartburn, let's talk about it. And so there's been times where we've met with them, similar to what Laura was saying, that, you know, we'll go to them and say, this is what we plan to do. How can we get there? And so sometimes we'll come off the release a little bit. Sometimes it's all about timing, making sure the district attorney's office is ready. But I've never had a situation where they blatantly said, there's no way you can release this. I guess if we had that scenario, then the chief and the district attorney, they would have to they'll have to figure it out at their level as to how they're going to be. But we try to manage it at a lot lower level.
Great, thank you. How about you, Damon?
Well, we did have that just come up with our most recent shooting in our East County in El Cajon, and that was we had just gotten our policy into place, and we already had to consider variables that we weren't quite ready for. It seemed to have worked out this time, but ultimately it'll be interesting to see how that works out. If investigation can move quickly in terms of interviews, then I'm thinking we have less standing to say no to something if it is in the best interest of the agency, who does in fact actually own the video. We have to be realistic about.
Okay, thank you all very much. Any other questions before we close out from anybody? Yes, so please remember that the toolkit is available to everybody, and that we have a separate body-worn camera technical assistance website that's run through CNA. So those addresses are showing on the screen right now. And as we said, we will post this up on the website at some point in the future. Let me again, on behalf of the Bureau of Justice Assistance, thank our panelists today. I think it was actually very timely and very relevant information. So thank you all very much. And please remember to complete your evaluation and send us any recommendations that you have for future webinar topics. So thanks everybody for today. Appreciate it.